There is big Rambam there, right? Chazar Malchus Yisrael, Yisrael Messiah Shana. What's the Rambam referring to? Part of the Hanukkah miracle. It's good that the Jewish people had Malchus. That is, they had their own independence, their own king, for the first time in a long time, and it lasted for like 200 years. That's what the Rambam says concerning Hanukkah miracle. And then we have the Ramban, who mentions that there was a big mistake involved in the founding of the Hasmonean dynasty. I'm going to put a piece of that I put in my email over here. I'm going to share it on the screen so you can see the Ramban says. I think it's relevant for today, something we have to think about. Here he says, this is the Ramban on classic Ramban on Lo Yasser Shevet Mihuda, Jacob's blessing to Yehuda, that apparently the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Ad Kiavo Shilo, until Shiloh comes. Who is Shilo? Shiloh is the name of a place. What is Shilo reference to? Normally they say it's until the Messianic king shows up. Ramban says, "L'fidati hayu amalachim hamolchim al Yisrael mishar shvatim achri David ovrim al dat avihem uma'avirim nachala." Ramban says that in his opinion, the kings who ruled over Israel from other tribes after King David were violating the opinion of their father, Jacob. And they're actually taking away someone's rightful lot. Now, this also is against what Rambam says. Rambam says it's totally legitimate to have kings from other tribes, just temporary kings. It could be promised Malchus, but not Malchus forever like David HaMelech. Those kings relied on the word of Ahya Shiloni, the Navi, the prophet, who anointed Yerovam, the first king of the 10 tribes. By the way, there was another anointed king. That was Yehu. He was actually anointed. Here it says that Yerovam was anointed by Ahya Shiloni. That's actually kind of strange. We mentioned this before. He wasn't anointed. He was given the kingdom through a ceremonial act of tearing up, his garment and receiving pieces of it. But the anointment didn't show up. Okay, well, there's a reason for that. It says, "Wa'aneth zera David leman zoth ach lo chayamim." Ahya Shiloni had said at the time that will afflict the seed of David, his descendants, but not forever. Once Israel continued doing this, persisted to appoint kings from other tribes, king after king, 21 kings in a row, non-Davidians. But they did not return to the kingship of Judah. They had violated the command of the Zaken, that means the grandpa, Jacob, and they were punished for this. It says, okay? It says that in Hosea, God was chastising the people. He says they appointed their kings, but not ones that I had appointed. Okay. This, like I said, is actually controversial. The Rambam would disagree on various points with the Ramban is saying here. Ramban continues, however, what he's going to talk about, what about the Hasmoneans? The Hasmoneans took the throne in about the negative 160s, and they were Kohanim. They're not Davidians. Now, in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, over the 10 tribes, could have said that there was some legitimacy to some of their kings. Why? Because you did have Nevi'im who appointed them. God had ordained Yehu to take the throne, right? And it was actually anointed, and that persisted. He was the first of 5 members of his dynasty who ruled over the Jewish people, the Israelites to be more exact. And Yeravam also was supposed to have a dynasty. He was promised that if he had been good. So I understand that there's some legitimacy to those types, as the Rambam says. But the Hasmonean were not appointed by any Navi. There weren't Naviim at the time. They actually, it says, they wrote about themselves that they're waiting for a Navi to show up who can answer some of their questions. So they certainly lacked a sense of legitimacy. But then again, the Rambam says, Chazar Malchus Yisrael, that's the Hasmoneans, that was a good thing. He doesn't actually say anything against what the Hasmoneans did was wrong. As a matter of fact, the Rambam, if you are consistent with his various opinions, would allow for, let's say, shofatim. A shofet is legitimate. More often than not, the shofet was just a natural leader who arose. And as Rambam says, sometimes it's a shofet, sometimes it's a melech. Ideally, you have a king who is appointed by the prophet. That's, it says you're not supposed to have a king who's not appointed by a prophet. But then again, so they have a status of shofet. A shofet also has legitimacy. So the Ramban says these Hasmoneans who ruled in the Second Temple times, ki hayu chasidei elyon. They were the highest Hasidim. That means they were God's pious people, not Hasidim like we were discussing before. It means they were Bekashas, and they're from Eastern Europe. It means that they were very pious. The Umalehim nishtachu Torah v'mitzvot Yisrael. If not for them, the Torah would have been and the mitzvahs would have been forgotten among Israel. But even so, Nanshu onesh gadol. They were punished with a great punishment. Ki arba'at b'nei Chashmonai zakena Chasidim hamolchim ze'achar zeh. 4 Hasmoneans, b'nei Chashmonai. The original that's Zakena. That's apparently Matisyahu's father, Yochanan, Kohen Gadol Hashmonai. Who was Hashmon? Where does the house start? Why do they start being called Hashmonai? A little bit of a machlokas. Either way, these Hasmoneans descended from Matisyahu, who ruled one after another. I think it starts with Shimon HaMaccabee was the first actual ruler. That was Yehuda Maccabee's younger brother. And his son was John Hyrcanus, and his son was Yanai. And his son were Aristobulus and also another Hyrcanus. In kol givuratham v'aslachatam, with all their might and all their successes, nafalu biyad oivehem becharev. They fell into the hands of their enemy and died by the sword. So here the Ramban, the Ramban, Nachmanides, is referring to 4 of the actual Maccabees. There were 5 brothers. 4 of them fell in battle until Shimon. Yehuda eventually fell in battle also. We had a lot of victories, but he died. He was killed in battle by Greeks. And as you know, his brother Elazar was actually crushed by an elephant, which is not a fun way to go. V'giya onesh besof l'masha amru Chazal, or Rabbeinu Zal, and this punishment came to them, and it's as described by Chazal. Kol man da'amar b'beit Chashmonai ka'atena avdahu. Whoever says, I came from the house of the Hasmoneans, which they're basically wiped out by Herod, so he is a slave. If you're making such a claim, why? Because if you survived from your house, it means you were just one of their slaves. Or Herod made a claim, which is brought in the history books. They take this as fact. They take Herod at his word, saying that one of the last Hasmonean women, princess, Miriam. So Herod wanted to marry her as a way to get legitimacy, right? So she committed suicide. She jumped off the roof. Just telling everybody, I'm not going through with this marriage, no matter what Herod wants, even though he's killed all my family, because the children he could have a claim to Hasmonean legitimacy. I'm not going to let him have that. So Chazal, when they realized this, they saw that Herod was basically claiming that he had children from this Miriam. He preserved her body. History books have it that he actually married her for a while and then he killed her, but they had children, and those children after are Herodians, but they have a claim to the Hasmonean throne as being descendants. So Chazal said those children, those descendants, are actually not her own Miriam's descendants, or Hasmoneans anyway. They're just, children from some other, concubine he had, a slave woman. So that's why anybody who claims Hasmonean lineage nowadays is a slave. He's basically saying, I'm one of these Herodian fakers. It says there, okay? They were all cut off because of this sin. That's what Ramban's saying. The Hasmoneans were wiped out by Herod and his party because they had usurped the Davidic throne. It's true, it had been about 400 years since there had been a Davidian on the throne, but perhaps they should have found someone who could rule properly. Find someone from that family, which still persists today, and give them the throne. Now, what?
Who is of a Davidic line?
There are people. There are people. You were just sitting next to someone in shul. Okay. Among Ashkenazim, it's a little bit weaker, but they say the families of the Maharal, Rashi, and the Vilna Gaon were well-known Davidic families. And among the Sephardim, especially in Bavel, the most miyuchas Davidic family were the family of the exilarchs, the Rashi Galusa, who were still in. By the way, Ramban also, they said, Maimonides himself, was appointed Reish Galusa, and his family ruled in Egypt autonomously over a Jewish community. They say there are Davidians also. Rambam was a well-known Davidian. Perhaps even when he's writing these things, maybe he was thinking about himself. There was the family of the Reish Galusa, the Al-Daudi family, means of David. So they were in Bavel for a long time, and they have descendants. There's a rabbi somewhere on the coast, a rabbi of one of those towns, is a well-known Davidian. And when that new Sanhedrin was first created a while ago, there was talk. Well, who are they going to appoint as their king? Who are they going to make their number one? And they said, we have our best candidate is one of their colleagues, this Rav, who's from a well-known Davidian family. They usually have names, just like Kohanim have names that indicate their kahuna. So these families have names like Ben David, or Sultan, or Sharvit. Okay, Sultan, meaning the ruler, or Malka. So there is a Rav who comes here. His name is Malka, last Mem Lamed Kaf Aleph. He's from apparently a Davidian family. There was another rabbi who used to live here of Tunisian descent. His last name was Sultan. They claim to be Davidians. And there's still a family here, the Sharvits. If I'm not mistaken, they claim to be Davidians. And you know their son is famous for being martyred in the war. And the other son is persecuted by Europeans and Americans and other Western liberal lowlives who want to take away all their money. So that's usually where you find these types of people.
Where do we know that they're being taught?
They claim to have a tradition just like Kohanim claim to have it. Look, I don't claim such a thing. You don't claim such a thing, you know. So, but whatever, that there has to be. Rabbi Bar-Hayim said to me, and I think he said this also in Shurim, that how are we going to know with the Messiah? We're going to look at him and say, okay, prove your Davidians, basically showing the signs of being a Messiah figure. He's succeeding in doing. So he said, doesn't matter. Don't worry. We have a promise that if you have someone who fits all the all these check marks, so he's probably going to be a Davidian. Okay, look, it's but
what's the thing about the Kohanim? I don't know. I find it suspicious that there's so many Kohanim and we're missing Levites.
Okay, we were talking about that last week on Shabbos also. Just when we had mentioned this, there was a rabbi who came here and said, yeah, there's certain groups of people they don't have Levium, they just have Kohanim, and there's Parshas Korach. He was saying this on Shabbos in the base medrash after the Vasikim Minyan. And then I walked outside and I was talking to someone. Yeah, I noticed at the Minyanim here for many years where we daven at Tomer Devorah, they never had a Levi who was not an Ashkenazic guy. It's officially not Ashkenazic Minyan, but it was always their usual Levi happened to have been a guy who's well-known Ashkenazic descent. And so the other two guys were Levian. They're obviously Ashkenazim. And then I happened to have gone to Birkat Kohanim for the regular Minyan, stepped in there for Torah reading, and they didn't have a Levi either. That's across the street. They davened Sephardic. The only Levi they had was a guest, an Ashkenazic guy once again, or the Ashkenazic guy who happens to live there. Those are the Levium. Yes, there is something suspicious going on. And the Or Sameach guys have pointed this out, that there are a lot of Jewish communities where they seem to be lacking Levium. But among the Ashkenazim, yes, they happen to have a lot of Levium. And there are prominent rabbinic families that were Levium, like the Bambergers and the Soloveitchiks. But in some places, they have like a Korach problem. All the Levium decide that they're Kohanim. Okay, what are you going to do?
It's funny now I think about
what?
I'm not sure I know.
Rabbi Yehuda Shmulevitz also was a Levi. His uncle was Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz.
I don't know if I know a Sephardi Levi.
Okay, well, that's a problem. Okay, but there's not really a claim. For some reason, no one's really claiming in history the Korach problem. Why is the Korach issue there? Because there are people who are jealous of being of the Kahuna for some reason. So many people who want to go to that, but you don't have fake Davidians. That's not a thing that people do. Okay. Next, he continues. Vafal pisha haya bezera Shimon onesh minat sedukim. Am I reading this right? Okay. It says here that Shimon Maccabi, he had. You could have said the reason his family was eventually destroyed was not because they were Davidic usurpers, but because usurpers of the Davidic dynasty, but because they all became a bunch of Sadducees. The Hasmonean dynasty went off the derech. John Hyrcanus himself went bad. When it says Yochanan Kohen Gadol went bad at the end of his life, it's not referring to his great grandfather. It's referring to him, John Hyrcanus. In Hebrews, John is Yochanan. He went off the derech. He officially had the title of Kohen Gadol. The Hasmonean rulers eventually did appoint Kohen Gadol to actually do the work, but officially they kept that title. Okay, because they're Kohanim. So that's the thing. They first were ruled as Kohen Gadol. Is it such a crazy thing that the Kohen Gadol should be the king, the ruler of the Jewish people, the de facto king, or the shofet, for example? And the answer is apparently yes. Pinchas was Kohen Gadol for quite a while, and also had a certain leadership role in the Jewish people during the era of the judges. And it says Eli Kohen Gadol was actually the judge. And Eli Kohen Gadol is in the list of judges of Israel before Shmuel Navi. He was the judge before Shmuel Navi. He was the last of the judges. And Shimon HaTzadik was the de facto leader of the Jewish people in his time, and he was a Kohen Gadol also. So it's not crazy that the Kohen Gadol would also have the crown of Malchus, so to speak, leadership of the Jewish people. No, well, why are they pasul?
Hasmoneans fought in the war.
No, so if you kill a person, you're not pasul from avodah. So you just can't do birkas kohanim. Pinchas, since when he killed Zimri, which we read about this week, Pinchas didn't say birkas kohanim, but he became Kohen Gadol. Okay, so yes, a Kohen Gadol, Yehuda Maccabee, I would imagine when he first did the service in the temple. That's the Hanukkah miracle. Who do you think lit that menorah? Right? That was him and his brothers. Anyone who had actually killed someone, even killing a Gentile in battle, in a good way, he killed Nicanor. That's a good thing, the bad Nicanor. But it makes him disqualified to say the priestly blessing. There were other Hasmoneans who did not become Sadukim, yet they all eventually were destroyed. So it must have been this sin. That's a good answer to a good kasha on the Ramban. They were not of Yehuda's descent or specifically King David's descent. They took away the scepter and the mechokek. The mechokek means he's the legislator. Mechokek is a reference to the king. The king can make rules. Okay. Their punishment was measure for measure. God caused their own servants to take over, to rule over them, and then cut them off. Herod was originally a servant in the house of the Hasmoneans, officially a slave to them. Okay. So that was problematic. So why am I bringing this up? Because we have a situation now where we're sort of in we're paralleling this. What happened to the Hasmoneans? After a while, they just became vassals of the Romans. Puppets. Pompey took over Jerusalem. That was about well more than 100 years before the destruction of the temple. He was the Roman, one of the Roman consuls. Contemporary of, was he with Caesar at the same time? I'm getting confused now already. But around that time, the Romans took over Eretz Yisrael. Originally, they had been, they're the ones who destroyed the temple. What happened was, as described in the book of the Maccabees, what they wrote themselves was that the Maccabees did like the revolutionary Americans. They're fighting against a world power. The Americans fighting the British, so they said, if we get the French, the usual rivals of the British in the war, against fight along our side, we tell the French that it's in their interest to support our revolution. They'll use their navy also and give a harder time for England. That actually was a factor in winning the war. The fact that the French decided, yeah, let's fight the British again. It's in our interest to have an independent United States. And then when they came, the French had their own revolution. They looked to Americans and knew we're going to support our revolution. It's like, no, not exactly. We don't want to get involved in these things. So the Hasmoneans at the time, the Maccabees, they basically asked the Romans to help them fight these Greeks. And they made deals with them. But the problem is, once you have Romans in Eretz Yisrael, they're just going to become more powerful. By the time we get to Yanai's successors, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, they're fighting over the throne. It's the Romans who are going to decide. And what did they decide? Neither. Okay? We're not going to split the baby. We're just going to take it for ourselves. So it was at that point that Israel, or more specifically Yehuda, ceased to be an independent state, was just dependent. Okay? It was a vassal. It was a satellite of the Romans. And that was, at least the Hasmoneans were still officially on the throne at that point, which says the Romans decided who the Hasmonean king was, and they wanted it to be the weaker person. And then Herod, with his manipulations and bribes and also murder, was able to just get rid of the Hasmoneans, and he became the client of the Romans. So it first went from independent Hasmoneans to dependent Hasmoneans to dependent Herodians. And the Herodians were much worse than Hasmoneans. Why? The Hasmoneans were originally, like the Ramban says, Chasidei Elyon. But eventually they were just a bunch of Tzedukim. They went off the derech in just a few generations. By the way, like Rabbi Victor Miller points out, back then, becoming Tzeduki was just a way of saying, I want to be off the derech, a cover for whatever it is you want to do. Just like being Hellenist the generation before. You really just don't want to keep the Torah. You want to do the Averas, so you say, I'm a Hellenist now. I'm part of a different group, which is reminiscent of why the way, let's say, conservative and Reform Judaism was in America when we were growing up. Yes, you could say that there's actually a conservative rabbi or two, or even a Reform rabbi who's legitimate, has a theological idea. They're extreme Rambamists and they don't find their way in YU or whatever it was. So they are part of the conservative movement, but they really much believe in God and halacha. The problem is, for the rank and file Jews and for many of the rabbis, it was just an excuse to not want to keep the Torah, right?
Okay.
So that's what it was to be a Sadducee back then. So we went, like I said, from Hasmoneans who were Chasidei Elyon to Hasmoneans who were basically off the derech to Herodians. And Herodians are just basically Goyim. Yeah, they're nominally Jewish because they're emancipated slaves. And emancipated slaves are like Gerim. So they're a family of Gerim. And they even produced Agrippus the First, who himself was a very frum guy and was excited about Judaism. But he still didn't have a real legitimate halach reason right to rule. So these Herodians, for a good, was it? I guess the Herodian dynasty started before the destruction of the temple by a few years. Okay, Herod took over. I don't know the exact year, before the year 1. Okay, contemporary of Hillel. So these Herodians are majorly off the derech. It's basically like having a totally assimilated Jews who aren't even Jewish in their roots, genetically, and they're running the country, and they're basically just doing what the Romans are the Romans bidding. So that's bad. And eventually, after that, after the Great Revolt and everything, and destruction of the temple, the Romans didn't even allow us to have our own nominal king, who was at least Jewish, or supposed to be acting Jewish, like an Agrippus. Agrippus II was majorly off the derech. We spoke about him before. He was basically a traitor, an enemy of his own people, and he lived out his days after the destruction of his kingdom and his city in basically Rome. Right, just rejoin the Romans. After the destruction of the temple for hundreds of years, what was Eretz Yisrael ruled by? A Roman governor, procurator. And the Jews didn't have their own autonomous ruler who was a Jew. Yes, there was a president of the Sanhedrin in Hillel's line, and that's why the office of Nasi became at that point hereditary, and even gave it to a quasi-Herodian, quasi-Davidian. That was Hillel's line. Hillel didn't exactly descend directly from King David in the male line. The Reish Galusis and Bavel were like that. So we went from good kings to bad kings to basically Gentile kings to not even allowed to have a king under the Romans. And then the Byzantines even got rid of having a Sanhedrin and a Nasi. So it was slowly they took away everything we had. So why is that important? So now, if you have the founding of the state of Israel by basically secular Jews who were at least, by the way, proud of their Judaism, right? The founding fathers, Ben-Gurion types, what was they were excited about the Hebrew language, building land, fighting wars and winning them, right? Yeshuva Aretz. At least they had some close to what they were doing, right? Yeah, they're into Tanakh. Okay, look, mitoch shelo lishma balishma, if you could say that about people like that. So they were, like I said, they were off the derech, then they were replaced by divorce, and then became just another part of the Roman Empire. So what could happen to us in the Third Commonwealth is we're basically in the second stage. The Ben-Gurion types and the Begin types even are gone now. Now we have the Hasmoneans who are completely off the derech. Those are people trying to take over. We have secular types who do not believe in the Torah and God, and they just want to turn Israel into a state like any other. They don't even want to win wars. At least Moshe Dayan, who is a complete Russian, who wanted to be rid of the Temple Mount. And they just can't have this Vatican thing. Someone reminded us today. That's what he said. We mentioned every Yom Yerushalayim. At least you had people like that who wanted to win wars, and they cared. Nowadays, they don't even care. They might as well be regular Romans. So we could go into the next stages where the Americans, next Rome, are going to even take away our government. They're just going to turn us into another territory, another occupied country, because that's what America does so much. They take over countries, regime change, right? How many countries are basically owned by America? There are a lot of places like that, right? Yeah. How is it? Hawaii and Guam. Did you know Hawaii had a queen? Hawaii's a state, right? They forced statehood. First, they made it into a territory. This thing they'll teach in Israeli yeshivas that the constitutional way of adding a state to the United States. They start off with 13 colonies. They became states. How's it up to 50? The people organize a territory, part of the United States, and they get their act together. It's like a mandatory Palestine. And then they apply for statehood, and they have a vote internally and in Congress and all that. Then they're admitted into the Union. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It's a territory, and they just haven't got their act together. They don't want to become an independent state. Oh, well, one of the states. They could be the 51st state. And Guam, there's a place like that, the Pacific Island, that's officially in the same status. They just don't become a state. You heard of the place? Well, yeah, they pay taxes. There's advantages and disadvantages. What about Hawaii? Hawaii had its own royal family. Hawaii's queen was deposed by the United States. It used to be its own little country. No, the Americans took it over. We believe in freedom except for people who don't deserve it. The Hawaii's queen, whatever her name was, she had some sort of native name. I think lived out her days on the mainland, but she had been deposed. She had her country taken from her, and then the Hawaiians elected to have statehood. Okay, so Israel. I'm not going to say that they're going to turn Israel into that. I'm just trying to say that we are. It would make a lot of Americans happy if they could just get rid of make Israel be done with this whole formality thing. By the way, that's what's going on with Gantz. The whole that attempt to build that pier, thank God it failed, right? Put an American foothold in this country, and then that whole thing about pushing up Gantz and having him overthrow Bibi and all that was happening a few months ago. I'm not pro Bibi. I'm just trying to say that Gantz was an obvious choice of the Americans who want to turn him as the puppet ruler of Israel. That's happened before in history, and that's what they're trying to do again. So that's corresponds to Pompey choosing his puppet, which Hasmonean, to put on the throne at his pleasure. Okay, or is it leisure or pleasure? They say that officially the Parliament in the United Kingdom and its prime minister, his term of office his tenure is at His Majesty's pleasure or leisure. I forget which word they use. I mean, really the king could just decide when to fire him. Constitutionally, he doesn't do that, but that's the thing. He works for the king. So too, they were going to choose it. In the next stages, parallel what's going to happen when the Romans just got rid of our kingdom and made it that they just governed us directly. Okay, so watch out. This seems to be what's going to happen. That's basically what the American globalists want to do to Israel. Basically, get rid of the state of Israel. Okay, so we have to be on the lookout. So with regards to the halacha, it's a big machlokas here between Ramban and Rambam. However, history doesn't repeat itself. That's what we have to watch out for. What we did see, the fact is that the Hasmoneans eventually were eliminated. So we have to worry about the current regime coming to an end. And even though maybe they deserve it, if it's done by the Romans, i.e. the Americans, it's going to be bad for us. Okay, it could start a trend that will only end in, just much worse.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but
okay.
Nowadays you could say there are a lot more people who are on the Judah Maccabee side than there were on the Herodians.
Yeah, so the Chazal addressed that. They said, what led to the destruction of the second temple? The first temple, the people were worshiping idols. They're Gila Rayos and Shpichus Damim, right? Second temple times, most of the Jews were good from Jews. They're keeping the Torah and doing everything. What was the problem? The Sinas Chinam, the politician class, was fighting amongst themselves. Even if we're all a bunch of good Torah Jews, like at the end of Second Temple times, the vast majority of Jews were Shomer Torah mitzvos. There was much higher standards than we have now. The fact is, leadership was garbage. And the people fighting over leadership were just fighting among themselves and hurting the rest of us. So that led to the destruction of the temple, and it could happen again. So I want to watch out, even if we were all good. The problem with one of the deficiencies of Haredi society is Haredi society says, let's all keep the Torah. Let's all be observing kashrus and Shabbos and everything. Let's all go to shul in the morning. That's great. But it has no vision for leadership, right? Especially political Haredism, which is the bad type of Haredism. Having a Haredi community is a good thing, right? And having Haredi suspicion of government is also a good thing, like the rabbi said yesterday. But good from Jews have to have a plan how to govern themselves according to the Torah. If government, running a country, is not part of your Torah plan, which it should be, you're going to end up in Galus, even in your own country. You'll be ruled over by others. That's the way it was, and that's what the result was after the destruction of the temple. The Jews still were on the derech in Rabbi Yonassi's time. Lots of from Jews, but they were limited to living in the Galilee, and they had no kingdom. They had no Beis Hamikdash. We're basically living in the times of Rabbi Yonassi. We want to get back to having a temple. We want to have a proper government, and the stage that we have to do is, in order to learn from the lessons of the Hasmoneans, we have to have a proper form of government, the right types of people on the throne. First, they have to be Jews who are keeping the Torah, and they also have to know that the Torah informs how they govern. That's what we should go for. I think that's a problem. There's someone we were davening with before. He's a very learned fellow, a Dayan, an active rabbi. But when elections come along, he's always stumping for whichever the current incarnation of the religious Zionist party. But in itself, it's like a Haredi party. It always wants to be part of whatever governing coalition there is, but never wants to actually lead. So that's a problem. There were soldiers who were wondering this. You saw that news article that they freed terrorists and sent them back to Gaza. Okay? And there were soldiers who had to escort them on the bus and release them back to Gaza. And they're wondering, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. Why are we doing this? And when I asked, I would say to them, yeah, you're doing this because you follow the orders. There's enough rank and file good Jews.
The bus, then the enemy combatants,
but they didn't shoot them. They let them go. And it doesn't make any sense to take the enemy. The fact that they took them as prisoner and then killed them. They kept them in prison for a while and then they released them. So a lot of things that go on in the army, it's because even though you have rank and file who are mostly good Jews who are sacrificing so much, like yourself, not enough guys are saying, hey, but these certain orders are ridiculous. And we are not going to release our enemy. We should kill these people. I thought if there was a bus, guarded by a bus full of enemy combatants, they should have one good soldier should have just winked and nodded to everyone else on the bus, all the other soldiers, say, I'm now going to shoot all of our prisoners. That's what you should have done, but no one's doing that. You're all following orders too much. There's no one who's leading everybody saying, here are the orders. If you want, I can take over the army. If all your soldier friends would agree, I will give them perfectly good orders. Just have fun, destroy everything. Don't risk your lives in any way. Just win the war. I think they would listen to me, right?
Oh,
okay. So I'm offering my candidacy to lead the army. People said yesterday, my wife's cousin, I told him just do it like this. He's like, okay, so why don't you run the army? Like, I'd be happy to. If everybody of all the soldiers want to take orders from me, I'd be happy to give them and tell them exactly what to do, and we'd be fine. I think that if how many soldiers are there?
wow.
There's a lot of soldiers. I think they want to hear orders like this. They want to hear win, right? Win as fast as you can and take spoils. That's a great thing. How many actual commanders are the ones saying, don't shoot the enemy, take them prisoner and then release them, right? How many are they actually there? I think it's just a paper tiger. Okay.
They're the few at the top of the.
Yeah, so stop listening to them. Depose them, just arrest them. Just tell them no. Right? Just tell them no. We need one big unanimous refusal. Just like before the hit not kut, at least the people were saying, no, we're not going to go along with this. Enough people say we're not going to go along with this. You're going to win. We saw learning Hilchos Kiddush Hashem. We have to finish with this. What is Hilchos Kiddush Hashem? The Rambam says, Yehareg vel Yavor. A Jew has to know when push comes to shove, you're given this choice, violate the commandment or die. So you have to be willing to die for it, right? But that's a very hard test. Most people, I don't know, when they're given that test, there are many Jews who passed the test, many Jews failed. They're called anusim. The Gemara continues and says that if the had Jew who's told, worship the idol, convert to Christianity, or die, and so he took the easy way out, he's an anus, he's putter. Anus rachmana patre. People forget that part. You were supposed to yarg al yavar, but you didn't. You let yourself live. So you're totally exempt. You should do tshuva for such a thing, but there's no chatos, there's no misa for such a thing. A Jew under duress has to do something, anything, even the worst avera, he's an anus after the fact. Before the fact, he should give his life. So why do we learn this? Why do we have to know that? Sometimes we have to fight for self-defense. Like, let's say, take a person like me. I've never been in battle before. We have to know that sometimes self-defense will call for, let's say, using a gun and shooting someone. How many regular people, their entire lives, never been in a confrontation before, suddenly attacked, okay, life or death situation, and they have to use lethal force to save themselves? How many people are ready to do that when the time comes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the thing. That you only get a test like this maybe once in your life, maybe once in your life. So are you prepared for the moment of truth? So everybody here has to prepare themselves mentally for such a thing. You have to know you are here right now. We're basically sitting at the cusp of the war of Gog and Magog. You understand? I don't think people understand how much the people in the north. I don't know how Hezbollah hasn't attacked until this point. They're just waiting to do stuff to us. So we have to be prepared. And for many soldiers, sometimes the moment of truth happens all the time. The question is, when are you finally going to wake up? I saw this. Someone posted that there was Arabs playing soccer on the Temple Mount, right? In the afternoon. They use it as a public park. They go there and they have picnics. The women bring their children. They're walking home from school. So they go there to play. They go there to play and to have picnics, right? So that the first thing is they're desecrating the place, using it as a park, like they do, because not a holy place, and overflow crowds for their mosque on the south side. And the even worse thing is that they happen to be playing soccer, which is the lowliest, most degrading of the sports. Okay, they should at least be playing a more civilized, manly, dignified sport. But whatever, that doesn't matter. We had something about the Haftarahs. We have 3 minutes. We're not going to go into that. Let's just mention today was Thursday. We should have been fasting today, right? Or at least having a new year. We've been in a state of emergency. So you read Maseches, Maseches Tainus. You see that there's a bunch of features of special prayer convocations. So let's go through them. Outside. We know that there's fasting, right? That's no eating and drinking. Inuyim. Our most of our fast days on the calendar don't have the other inuyim. But when you have an emergency fast, you're also not supposed to be wearing your shoes, etc. Right? No bathing. There's special prayers.
Wasn't that get more severe?
They get more severe. Yes, they get more severe. Yeah, but just fasting. But once you get there, you get into the inuyim. And there's special prayers. What are the special prayers? Well, there's Ne'ilah, and there's the Torah reading. And when you do say, there's those extra brachas. And there's prayer in the streets because the shul has an overflow crowd, so we're going to be in the streets. And they have the Chatzot Road and the public reckoning, where there's a king we're supposed to go and start looking around what's wrong and take stock of everything and start to make takanas to improve society. Yeah, they bow down and they have a zaken rebuke the people. You need to find someone who be a proper chazan and a proper zaken. If he's old and has a white beard and he's been through there and he's had sar gidul banim. I heard someone like who said it this week. Someone came to the rabbi and said, "Oh, I have so much problem. Here's my tsaras for my kids. This and that." Says that's not sar gidul banim. That's just regular gidul banim. That's just gidul banim. Sar gidul banim is much worse. So, and then in extreme cases where they had say famine and drought, they visit the cemetery, right, to shock people, and of course a lot of tzedakah, increased tzedakah, and no work, and close down the shops, etc. Right? And what's the last factor that we left off all this? Is how do you have to change the prayers around, and what do you have to do? And also go to the temple now. The Rambam says when they had this in Yerushalayim, they daven on Har Bayis. That is in the courtyards of the temple. Mentioned in the Tanakh. You have a fast day. Where are you supposed to go? To the temple. And why did I mention this? Because they were discussing, the local Kabbalists called for a fast day today, and they had special mincha prayers this afternoon at 6. And there was a fellow who came and said, you should have chatzot roast, just like Rabbi Weber's doing in the old city now for a few months, right? On him. Okay, should go try. I was out there. Twice I went. So he has in the morning, and I put out an announcement. Rabbi Brand was looking for people to make the minyan in the afternoon also. But the fact that they forget, they keep telling people, and also you're supposed to go to the temple for these things. Mention Sefer Malachim, Shlomo Melech prayed. That's what the people are supposed to do. They're supposed to pray to this temple. They're supposed to actually gather in the temple courtyard and pray. So I pray that people wake up and realize this. You should be going to the temple. There is no better place for prayer. When you go to the hotel, you're actually, in the olden days, they're just trying to get as close to the temple as possible. Nowadays, you can actually go to the temple and pray. They might not let you offer sacrifices. They might not let you bow down in there. But at least you go pray with a minyan there. And so shall you do. The more Jews who go there to daven, the more, the closer we get to the redemption coming to us. Shabbat shalom.